Thank you and for being here, and welcome to the second day of our event. We're going to start off this next session, and it's my pleasure to introduce our first plenary speaker for the day, my friend and colleague, Dr. Stephen Schachter, who's also going to be chairing this first panel entitled Accelerating the Development of Innovative Technologies in Industry. I'm so delighted that Steve can participate in the conference for a lot of different reasons. First, a key part of Steve's distinguished career is centered around the intersection of technology and medicine. He's the chief academic officer for Cimit here in Boston, an organization that has received significant funding to support the bridging of technology and medicine, which he's going to tell you a lot more about. Steve is also one of the original faculty and founders of the Osher Center and served as its first director of education, and he currently serves on our scientific advisory board. Through our more than 20 years of interaction, I've been amazed at the breadth and depth of his knowledge and his generosity in sharing it. He's also been instrumental in helping shape this particular event. Steve's a professor of neurology at the Harvard Medical School, a world-renowned expert in epilepsy, and the past president of the American Epilepsy Society. And as an example of the breadth of his curiosity and interest in traditional Chinese herbs, led to the discovery of a new plant compound called huperzine that shows great promise for treating epilepsy and neurological disorders. Steve's published over 250 articles and edited over written or edited over 40 books. As we're going to learn today, his current focus is accelerating medical technologies from bench to commercialization by engaging stakeholders, including government agencies and industry leaders. The title for Steve's talks today is From Great Ideas to Great Patient Impact, the Long and Winding Road.
Oh, thank you very much. And with apologies to the Beatles for the title of my talk. It's great to be here and to continue my involvement with the Osher Center, which I'm so pleased with the progress made under Peter's leadership, and this meeting is a great example of that. So you have a good idea, and there have been plenty of great ideas on display outside in the poster session, and you think you have an idea that could help patients in one way or another. But it's an idea that will take investment in order to develop it to the point where it can be made available to people, to patients. How does that happen? How do you get from the good idea to patient impact? And I didn't know the answer to this question as recently as probably 10 or 15 years ago, because it's not a typical part of the medical world. I'm not a PhD, I'm actually an MD. And, you know, in our clinical training, there's no coursework, there's no seminar, at least there wasn't when I came up through training, on how to move an idea forward to commercialization. That was for industry and academia, you know, were viewed as totally different and distinct and not to mix. But I have now, the past 15 years, learned mainly from my colleague, Mike Dempsey here, who will be speaking shortly, about this journey and this path, because it's one thing to have a good idea, but it's another thing to move it forward. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that and share with you how my organization, which is called Cimit, has helped sponsor that kind of journey for many dozens, if not hundreds, of innovators and entrepreneurs and academic innovators. Just a couple words about Cimit. Cimit was started in 1998 as a consortium of Harvard Medical School and several Boston teaching hospitals, as well as MIT. And its original purpose was to bring engineers and doctors together to address unmet needs in medicine and surgery, and particularly at that time, minimally invasive surgery, which was just starting. A major proponent of that was at MGH, but they didn't have the tools, they didn't have the surgical implements in order to do it. So that was the original motivation behind Cimit. But in the last 25, 26 years, the mission of Cimit has grown along with our national footprint. And our mission is to help leaders. They could be in government, they could be nonprofits, to tackle complex health problems that require more than one project to solve. And we do that by bringing expertise from a broad range of disciplines that are necessary in order to move technologies forward. And we do it in a way that accelerates the process. And I'll show you some data to support that contention in a little bit. Cimit's been around now, as I say, for 26 years. I joined Cimit probably 15-ish years ago. And I'm full-time at Cimit. It's just such a fun organization to work with. We've touched over 1,000 medical innovations across a variety of therapeutic and diagnostic areas. Of the projects that we support that are at an early stage, a translational stage, under Mike's leadership, which he'll probably touch on a little bit, we have a 50% commercialization rate, meaning that the projects that we fund in a pre-commercial stage, typically it's what you might consider to be translational research, taking basic research findings and making them of practical importance to patients. About half of them make it through and become products in the marketplace. That is quite impressive to people that are familiar with commercialization rates in general, particularly for academic-based innovation. And you'd like that number to be 100%. On the other hand, if it is 100%, you're probably not betting on enough high-risk, high-reward projects in order to make a substantial impact. So we're pleased with that, and we've developed over the years an approach to help facilitate commercialization, meaning getting products out into public that can help people, whether that's through an FDA regulatory program or otherwise. And it's not cheap to commercialize an idea. And so we, Cimit, can only take ideas so far before they need investment in order to take them to the finish line for FDA approval, it might be, or for manufacturing scale up. And that follow-on funding now is over $2.5 billion for projects that Cimit has started supporting at an early stage. Innovation is one of those words, kind of like pornography. The Supreme Court said, you know it when you see it. It's a difficult concept to define, but it's harder than you might think, mainly because of the complexity involved in the journey. And, you know, most of the posters that I went by yesterday, you know, are passionate about a particular approach to a particular problem. How can we make that generally available to people? That process, that innovation process, is the long and winding road. And often because the person who has the idea, that's in the trenches with, you know, in the medical world, just doesn't have the time or the training to take their idea forward. They know that if it was commercialized, it could help people, or they believe it. but they just don't have the wherewithal, let alone the resources to do that. So at Cimit, we've studied this process. You can tell that people like Mike and others at Cimit who have an engineering background, you can tell that they've taught us from a method, a workflow point of view, how to think about innovation. It's just not a bolt of lightning, that strikes you one day, and next thing you know, you've solved the problem. We believe the process of medical innovation starts with a firm understanding of what is the unmet need, medical need that you're trying to solve. Because if necessity is the mother or the parent of innovation or invention, if there's no necessity, odds are it's not going to be a successful journey for you, because it does take money, and it takes a buyer, it takes somebody who's interested in your idea once it hits the market, even before it's commercialized, but certainly once it is. In our capitalistic society, there needs to be a way to sustain it, and there has to be an unmet need, we believe, that you're solving. We call this medical pull. There needs to be a medical, a compelling reason that you understand, you've vetted, you may have talked to other people about this. Hopefully you have, if you're serious about this. And the unmet need is defined by what is the current standard of care. That's the starting point. So sometimes in an environment that we're in here, we think that the standard of care is what is practiced, at the amazing institutions in this area. But this is not your typical, all you have to do is go a bit outside of Greater Boston, and the practice of medicine changes dramatically. So we need to understand the standard of care as it's applied in different medical environments. From the standard of care, then comes the unmet need, the clinical need, that is then the basis for an idea that you might have. And then the rest of the nodes in blue ovals here around clockwise around the circle are ways to think about the milestones, or the, you might call them inflection points, that occur from going from that unmet need all the way to proving your idea works, maybe in an animal model or in some kind of controlled setting, then proving it works in some sort of clinical trial, and then moving that idea forward so that it comes to the marketplace. Again, whether that's through an FDA approval process or not. And then ideally, it has answered the clinical need that gave birth to that solution, so that upon launch, it's taken up and becomes hopefully the new standard of care, and around it goes. This is a cycle, or you can think of it as a spiral, since you don't really come back to the starting point, but as new solutions to unmet needs emerge, that leads to recognition of new unmet needs. This is a continuous cycle. Seems pretty reasonable, seems rational, seems like, oh, that's no problem. Just tell me what all these words mean in these boxes. But apropos to this being a long and winding road, each of these train stations, if you will, can go wrong, and you can get off the track quite easily. And here's some of the reasons why that happens. Maybe you focused on a clinical need that is too specialized. It's too narrow in focus, and it just doesn't lend itself, again, in our payer environment and the way American healthcare is. It just doesn't rise to a level that can get people excited, particularly those that will want to invest or donate money to help move the idea forward. And you can see the off-ramp for each of these nodes. And at Cimit, we've seen examples of all these things happen at these various stages. One of the most common issues we see in academia is that people interested in being promoted, want to publish, want to present. You present an original idea that at a meeting like this, a poster session outside, that is potentially patentable, but you've discussed it in public. You've inadvertently shared your information with the public, and therefore it's no longer considered novel enough in order to generate a patent. So there's some interesting behaviors that are needed to go through this cycle that have been somewhat contrary to the academic world in terms of, disseminating new information, to the public, which is, after all, is the mission of academic medical centers. This is why training and experience, working with experienced people doing this, can help you stay on track. So it's not easy, and there are plenty of reasons why it may not go well. One of the important things, though, is if you have some experience and it didn't go well, is to learn from that experience, own up to it, and we will hear examples of that from our panelists shortly. Because it's like any professional activity, you need to learn from your mistakes, and we do, clinical medicine. This is the same. So Cimit, this organization, has developed a series of or some helpful and practical approaches to help innovators, particularly in the academic setting, to navigate that journey. And this is a slide Mike's wife created that it's a busy slide, but it shows, it takes that cycle and converts it to a straight line from left to right, where you have there's an idea, and it goes across that cycle all the way to making it available to the public. And you can see this spectrum divided into a series of steps in the workflow. And for each of these, Cimit has worked to implement support and tools to keep you on track as you go across that innovation cycle. And a lot of this is virtual, the work that Cimit does, but a lot of it involves people as well. And we've been very fortunate at Cimit, under Mike's leadership, to have a cadre of experienced innovators and entrepreneurs and people from the venture capital community who have a lot of experience, decades of experience in commercializing medical technology, and are at a point in their career that they want to give back, or they might be looking for their next opportunity as an executive. But that is one of our secret sauces, because they've made the mistakes. They've learned from their mistakes. They understand the bumps in the road. They've gone off ramp a number of times themselves, but stuck with it to be successful in their careers. You see a little bit about the average profile for this team. And this is just a small fraction of the people that we have access to. And the Cimit mission, if you will remember, is to assemble experts to help address and solve a complex problem. And as Cimit has grown in its base and experience, we've have added significantly. We have probably 200 to 300 people that have worked with us now that we can call on for their particular expertise as we address a new challenge, a new problem. What are the tools that we have? There's 4 of these tools. CoLab is a cloud-based software program that allows people to submit applications to Cimit, allows them to collaborate through the cloud privately before they submit their application. It then moves into the review stages. It tracks every concrete step in the workflow that Cimit goes through, from release of a new RFA to selecting and funding applicants. And GATES, which stands for Guidance and Impact Tracking System, is a online program. It's available to the public, gates.org. It takes each of those nodes in the innovation cycle and helps you understand what should you be thinking at a particular stage in terms of the clinical impact that the project will have. What is the regulatory aspect, if any, you need to worry about, whatever stage you're at. How is this going to be implemented in the clinic? What is the stage of the technology? And we in academia have a tendency to keep doing what we do well and to ignore what we don't do well. And what we do well is deliver care and help patients as best we can. What we don't do well is to think about the non-clinical aspects of our ideas, even at an early stage, what you should be thinking about. So if you go to gates.org, you'll see for each of those nodes, there's suggestions on what you should be thinking about, what are the deliverables, if you will, in those various perspectives, from clinical, engineering, market, regulatory. People in industry are well familiar with this, but not the typical academic-based investigator. CRASH is like a boot camp for people that have interesting ideas, that are unfamiliar with the commercialization process, that want to engage in a series of lectures and activities, such as going out and talking to stakeholders. And it's specific to healthcare. Some of you may be familiar with the I-Corps program through NSF, which is a commercialization boot camp, but it's not aimed at healthcare, which has its unique economic and regulatory aspects. It's a 10-week course, and typically the cohort of students, if you will, that go through it are teams of a clinician, an engineer, and an innovator or entrepreneur. And then the risk assessment score, which Mike has been working on, is a way to help funders understand the potential risk of a project, even at an early stage, based on intensive interaction with a project team still in the application stage, which would be germane to virtually any grant-giving organization. So to make this real, let's talk about a project that we started in 2020, February, March of 2020, called RADx Tech specifically. This was in response, as you can imagine, to the COVID epidemic. And I think we can still remember where we were when we're all dealing with this, and how the country, came to a standstill in terms of isolation and supply chain issues and sick people and dying people and everything else. The CDC came out with a diagnostic test that ran into some problems. We didn't have, leadership to tackle this early on, but eventually Operation Warp Speed was designed with in a three-legged stool, one of which was diagnostics, to support the development of diagnostics, The Congress appropriated $1.5 billion to NIH, to Francis Collins, then the director of NIH, specifically to develop diagnostic tests. Francis Collins turned the money over to NIBIB, which is the Bioengineering and Imaging Institute at NIH, primarily the group overseeing medical technology. Cimit happened to be funded by NIBIB at that time to coordinate point of care testing across a network called the Point of Care Technology Research Network. So we were charged with NIBIB to stand up and run a huge program that dwarfed any previous project we've been involved with. The purpose being to get diagnostic tests out to the marketplace at record speed, at record volume, in order for every American to test themselves if they needed to, as often as they needed to. So we were talking, billions of tests. So I can still remember where I was when we had the phone call with the director of NIB saying, "Are you up to this?" And I said yes. He couldn't see me. I said yes. So off and running we were. We took the Cimit model, that idea to market pathway, and we notched it up. We added some innovative steps into the workflow, and we were able to get products to the marketplace in 2020. Typically, a medical device may take 4 to 6 years to come to the market. We were able to get diagnostics as soon as 5-6 months after we started. These were projects that were on the bench when we started funding them. But because of the network that we put together in terms of extramural outside the NIH, as well as within government agencies, close cooperation with all the agencies you can imagine, FDA, DOD, not so much CDC back then, but HHS, BARDA, I might be leaving out others. It was obviously this was a crisis the country was facing, and everyone had a stake in this, personally as well as professionally. And we were able to build a team in the hundreds of people across the country. And ultimately, this resulted in 55 new products receiving the FDA's emergency use authorization, a total of 8 billion tests, production capacity, and including the first over-the-counter test for use at home. This was the first FDA-cleared diagnostic test since home pregnancy test that became available, and represents a significant sea change in the access of consumers to test themselves. We're now seeing play out with new over-the-counter diagnostic tests coming out quite often now. So RADx was a proof of concept, if you will, that the process that we used to support translational work, starting at the bench, meaning starting in the lab, starting in somebody's garage, starting in somebody's spare time, could be supported with enough expertise and enough resources to get to a point of FDA approval and into the marketplace. We supported the whole process from de-risking the technology, de-risking these diagnostic tests with our own laboratory, which was at Emory, through scale-up of manufacturing, through delivery of tests from the factory to the US, to the end consumer. The DoD helped supply the jumbo jets to carry hundreds of thousands of tests from wherever these were being manufactured to the US. It was quite an amazing effort, likened to the, as a mini Manhattan Project, for those of you familiar with the Manhattan Project, by one of the US senators. What this showed was that the Cimit approach to helping innovators was successful in getting products to the marketplace. Since RADx, we are now applying the same model to other big complex problems that we're tackling. And the concomitant meeting that was going on here yesterday is an example of that, what's called the Neuro Blueprint MedTech Incubator Hub Program, which is NIH sponsored and funded, which is designed to develop neurotechnologies that could be helpful to people with disorders of the nervous system, not only neurological diseases, but also psychiatric conditions. There's 11 supporting institutes at NIH, including NCCIH, by the way. So that's a very brief overview of the long and winding road. We have some veterans here of that process to share their own personal stories with you. And hopefully one or another will resonate with where you might be in your journey. If you have questions about this, feel free to email me, contact us. We're based out of MGH and happy to help guide you potentially to resources or funding opportunities. With that, I'll close. Thank you. And so let's, we have, as I say, 3 presentations for you. Folks that have walked the walk. And our first presentation is from Mike Dempsey, who is the entrepreneur in residence at Cimit. Mike has 35 or so years in the medtech industry. He holds dozens of patents on various medical devices and has founded several companies, which I'll talk about today, at least for 2 of those. His primary responsibility in an academic setting is to help academic innovators take the steps needed to move across that innovation cycle. And in addition to his work as a medical entrepreneur, Mike is an emergency medical technician. So since I've stopped seeing patients, ironically, Mike is the only one in our group that actually sees patients anymore. He's also a founder of a nonprofit that provides home maintenance services for people of limited physical or economic means. So you can see where his heart is. So Mike, come on up and share your knowledge with us.
So I'm going to go off script a little bit. One of the things that I also do is I teach healthcare entrepreneurship at MIT in the Sloan School. And with that particular phenotype, we like to talk in equations. So there's what we call the MIT impact equation. Impact equals invention times commercialization. And if either invention is 0 or commercialization is 0, impact is 0. So it's all of our conversations today are going to be more on the commercialization side of the world. And that does not diminish the invention side of the world. That does not diminish the importance of the basic research, because if that isn't there, there is nothing to commercialize. And of course, there are many, many ways to commercialize something. You can offer it for sale, you can publish it, you can make it available for free. But in the context of my talk, we're going to be talking about what I would consider a more traditional entrepreneurial journey. So I've started 5 companies. I'm going to talk about 2 of them here, 1 success and 1 failure. At a high level view, they're conceptually very similar. So a company called Radiance, it was founded in 2001, was selling to hospitals. Our market size was $15 billion. We were trying to sell only 4 systems per year. A typical system that we would sell would be about $3 billion. It would take us 2 years to sell a system in In the best case, those of you who are entrepreneurs selling, doing big consultative sales know that, it takes a long time to do these. Oops, sorry. Our cost of goods sold or what we had to spend to make something cost about $1 million for every one of these systems. And it cost us about $650,000 to acquire a customer. So, in many ways, this is a classic sell a product to a hospital type company. In the next column over, we were taking a shot at selling products to consumers. Very similar in some ways, very different in other ways. But a couple of things I want to point out on the bottom, the cost of goods sold for that product was about 8%. So it was, our gross profit was much higher, but our customer acquisition cost was about $3,000 to acquire one customer. So the clever among you will immediately note a problem. Companies are very similar in other respects. Both had validated products, both got through regulatory, both had manufacturing set up, both got SBIRs, multiple SBIRs in both companies. Both had outside financially driven investors. So from a business perspective, you would look at these, except for the last two lines, the most important ones. Was the company able to generate profit to survive? And in Radiance, the answer was yes. And in Socorro, the answer was no. And why is that? Well, this is an actual slide that I embarrassingly found in my archives to our board talking about our sales traction. So we tried to sell to 425 customers in this particular 16-week period. 17 of them, 5%, asked for trials. We lost about 9 or 10% of the deals, but 85% of the deals were still in play. So customers weren't making decisions. If a customer isn't making a decision to buy your product, that means you're not giving them a compelling enough value proposition where they say, yes, I absolutely want it. So that logically leads to this ridiculously high customer acquisition cost. So in this case, we would spend 2 years selling a $3 million product. And in this case, we'd spend 6 months selling a product that was worth $2,400. So this is sort of an advanced example of one of the ways that you can fail. And I chose to use this as our comparison because I think the next slide is Gates. No. I chose to use this as our comparison because many people assume that if you invent something cool or even something that's mundane, but it has impact, you will just naturally be successful. And this is a slide that I think kind of defines that idea. Most of us start with focusing on the technology risk. And let's be honest, that's the way we typically get funding, right? Like the NIH doesn't fund anyone to go de-risk a market. They fund us to invent cool stuff. But what successful investors and entrepreneurs know is that the first thing you should be doing is de-risking the market. And the classic example of this is Facebook. Those of you that can remember back when Facebook started, there was all this angst in the technology media, like how are they ever going to make money, right? They're spending tons and tons and tons of money to get eyeballs into their platform. And this is kind of before the whole idea of targeted advertising was out there. But after a year or two of acquiring customers, essentially what they were doing is de-risking the market. Then they would go to someone like Coke and say, how would you like to be able to target your ads to the specific demographic that you're looking for and measure their conversion rate? Not a single customer that Facebook went to said no, because they had de-risked the market. They didn't start with a tech push. In our world, they started with a clinical pull. In the Cimit world, we would much rather support a clinician who comes in and says, I've got this clinical problem. I have no idea how to solve it. I don't have a gizmo invented. I don't have a company. I don't have a process, but I have this problem. Will you help us? They are much more successful, our data shows, than technologists, engineers who come in and say, I have this thing, let's go find an application for it. So if I leave you with one thing today, I would encourage you to make sure that you understand the value that you're giving to your potential economic buyers. De-risk the market first. And it's not about the solution, it's about selling the solution. So, you know, I'm as guilty of this as anyone. Salespeople sometimes have a bad reputation. But when I say selling the solution here, I don't mean in like a sleazy sales kind of way. I mean, making sure that you're providing value to whoever your economic buyer is. If you can sell something on paper before you even have it, that's ideal. So thank you. I'll be around. We're going to have a conversation, I think, and happy to answer any questions when it's appropriate.
Thank you very much, Mike. Our next speaker is Ariel Garten, and she's the co-founder of Muse. She studied neuroscience initially, and then worked as a psychotherapist for a decade while creating Muse, which is a clinical grade EEG platform widely used as a neurofeedback device to train folks in meditation as a way to track sleep and overall to improve brain health. It's been used in over 200 published third-party scientific studies, and Ariel and her company have been featured in hundreds of articles and on news outlets such as CNN, New York Times, Forbes, and Fortune. She's on the advisory board for the Center for Aging and Brain Health Innovation and lectures around the world on brain health. Ariel?
Thank you so much, Stephen, and it's a total honor to be here with everyone today. So this was a perfect setup to the long and winding road of innovation in medtech. I'm going to take you through the various chasms that we've had to cross in our 2 decades long journey building this tool. So this is Muse. It's a clinical grade EEG that is able to be used for a wide variety of functions, which I'll take you through, including meditation, sleep tracking, as a research tool, and more. It is a 4-channel EEG system, 2 channels frontal, 2 channels temporal. It also has a PPG and a host of other sensors inside of it. And we began the creation of it in a lab in the early 2000s, in 2001 at the University of Toronto. There we had the idea that although there was a mechanism to read the brain, an EEG, in order to do that, you had to go to a lab, be hooked up with wires, and somebody across the room would be able to interpret your data. We wanted to unlock the brain by giving everyday people access to their brain at any time they wanted. So we developed this, Muse, a sleek, easy to use EEG device that could have a myriad of applications. Now, as both Stephen and Mike alluded to, being able to do lots of things is insufficient to actually taking you to market. When you go to market, you have to have an unmet need that you are fulfilling. And saying, hey, we've got this super cool thing, it can do lots, really doesn't help you get anywhere. So we came to market with our first solution, which was a meditation tool. The problem that we knew we needed to solve was that meditation is incredibly hard to do. It's this weird thing, you sit there, you're told to just focus your attention and not think about anything, and your brain gets filled with thoughts, and you're like, I have no idea how to do this. This sucks. And so most people don't begin a meditation practice and instead get frustrated and walk away. And we said if there was a little coach or a guru who was sitting there with you, watching what was going on inside your brain and showing you how to do it, would that solve the problem of teaching you how to meditate? And it turns out the answer is yes. We created Muse to give you real-time feedback on your brain while you meditate, actually letting you know when you're focused and when your mind is wandering. And then we give you charts, graphs, scores, things that show you what's going on in your brain, making this otherwise, intangible process really tangible and showing you that it actually has real change in your brain activity. This turned out to be massively successful, and over 500,000 people around the world have either started or enhanced their meditation practice with Muse. As we thought about how to actually take this device to the market, we were too early for clinical. This was now 2012, 2014. People were starting to know that meditation was good for you, but only, the most elite centers like this were actually practicing meditation in medicine. I'm seeing great nods from Peter over here. So when we went through the various categories of market opportunities, we decided clinical, way too hard at this point, and we didn't even know how the FDA was going to regulate it. Researchers, really small market. Who was doing meditation research back then? Pharma, incredibly long sales cycle. They'd love this EEG system for something, but it wasn't yet clear what. And then consumer seemed like the obvious choice because with the opportunity to impact many lives. We didn't totally think through the economics of it. We tried to make the device as inexpensive as possible, but consumer is still hard because people are paying out of pocket. And consumer marketing requires things like Facebook, which is a very different bag than clinical marketing. Well, it turned out that in 2016, the FDA changed their guidance on general wellness devices like ours, giving us a path to market both in clinical as well as consumer. And in the background, Steve talked about pull. So in the background, without us going and marketing to clinicians were beginning to use Muse as a meditation tool in their clinical practice. The first study that came out with Muse as a clinical tool was with Mayo. They had patients with breast cancer using Muse to meditate, and they saw improvements in their stress, their fatigue, and their overall quality of life through the cancer care process. Mayo loved it so much, they've since done 7 studies with Muse, all on their own dime, looking at the improvements that Muse meditation makes in long COVID, fibromyalgia, menopause, and more. Other labs started to use Muse as an intervention, and then doctors began even using it themselves. So one study with code teams using Muse to meditate, they reduced their time to resuscitation in code simulations. And then Mayo's doctors actually began using Muse during the pandemic. They gave 50 of their doctors at the most stressful time in their life in the ER, Muse devices to help them meditate and sleep. And they reduced their stress, improved their cognition, and decreased their burnout by 54%. So we were seeing huge impact in clinical, both with patient populations as well as with the clinicians themselves. In the background, meditation research started to become a bigger thing, and researchers began using Muse as a tool to actually do research on meditation because you could really see if your patient had meditated or your subject, and you could be able to track the level of change. Then in the background, without us supporting it in any way, neuroscience research began picking up Muse as a tool. What first seemed like a gimmick to many, could you possibly only have a 4-channel EEG and do something meaningful with it, turned out to be validated as a very effective tool. And for example, 2 different labs were able to detect stroke in the ER in 3 minutes or less. One of them published it in Nature. And from there, over 200 publications using Muse just as a clinical grade EEG, being able to do distributed neuroscience began to emerge. Steve talked about the cycle of innovation. You go around the loop once, you get to the top, and you're like, hey, there's another unmet need in this product. We now need to do this again and again. So the unmet need we then discovered was once you have a clinical grade EEG on somebody's head, you can not just track their diurnal activities like meditation, but you can also track their sleep. And we realized there was a massive unmet need in helping people sleep, and people were actually using their Muse before they went to bed and reporting better sleep. So we created a purpose-built device, Muse S, which came with an intervention that we built, a neurofeedback intervention that was demonstrated to improve sleep quality by 20% by helping you fall asleep and then fall back asleep. So consumers began using that. It began to be quite successful. Anecdotally, we were hearing that it was working. We had researchers then come on board and do studies with it. And while they were doing that in the background, we were building our algorithm to be able to track sleep and ultimately track sleep as effectively as a sleep lab. So this opened up the next unmet need. Anybody who's ever done a sleep study knows how charming it is to go into a sleep lab, get wired up, and for one night have somebody monitor your sleep and say, this is what your, sleep every night is like. It's clearly unrealistic and incredibly expensive. So we were actually able to build Muse into essentially a sleep lab in your own home. And it's now widely used by a myriad of researchers, including the National Institute of Mental Health, DoD, and more, as a basically substitute for a PSG system. So it's able to track sleep and automatically stage sleep effectively in your own home. From there, the neural network models that we had used to train our sleep algorithm led us to build an entire brain model from which we are now able to derive insights from the brain, because at this point we have over 1 billion minutes of EEG data. So this allows us to discover the next unmet need, a need that we couldn't have discovered was unmet back in 2012 or 2001 when we began this, that we can now have the ability to unlock insights in the brain using AI against our large normative database of brain data. So overall, that's allowed us over the last 20 years to build a platform that is used widely in consumers as a brain health tool to help you sleep, meditate, track your cognitive state, et cetera, as a clinical tool that allows you to bring meditation, stress relief, and sleep support into your clinical practice under the general wellness guidelines of the FDA, as well as a research tool that's widely used for distributed neuroscience, and now an AI platform to unlock insights around the brain. Steve asked me to talk through some lessons learned. The first one was the unmet need, and I can tell you there were so many unmet needs along the way, but only some of them could really crystallize and galvanize. We have lots of people that say, hey, you could use this to track epilepsy. You can use this to do that. Each of those are massive projects. And we say, great, take the device, go, find the funding, get the support, go to Cimit, which is now what I'm going to tell them, to bring that to market. Because each of these different, very specific domains take extraordinary amounts of effort and vision to bring them to market. Not that it's impossible, though. Each of these are possible domains. How did I get started? With vision and with extraordinary amounts of chutzpah. Simply the sheer desire to say this needs to happen and we can make it work. And how we continued along the path was by getting positive feedback along the way. So when you go to somebody and you say, hey, I'm building this thing, do you want it? And they say, yeah, absolutely. I need that. You're doing the right thing. When you say we're building this thing, do you want it? And they're like, seems cool, but I'm not quite sure how it works. You have more work to do. So continually testing the market and understanding, does this solve the pain point? Working with your customer closely to understand exactly what they need for it to fit into their workflow, to fit into their payment structure, to fit into their context and how they need to sell it into their bosses to believe that this is the right thing that I need now. That is the process of innovation. It's having a great idea and then validating, testing, shifting on the long and winding road. And then finally, how do we think about the impact? Well, we're incredibly honored to have had, as I said, over 500,000 people use this device, thousands of researchers, but the impact, is still tiny. This is just the beginning. And I think part of the impact that we've been able to have is also to inspire a generation of other devices that now look very similar to ours, who are in the marketplace and also able to serve the needs of consumers, clinicians, and larger customers. So hopefully this is just the beginning of the unlocking of the brain. Here's my contact information, and scan the QR code to take you right to my email address, because I would love to speak to anybody who's interested in building a tool in any domain. Happy to give you my feedback, my thoughts, my unsolicited or solicited advice, take your pick. And also anybody interested in integrating Muse into your clinical or research practice, I'd love to chat with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ariel. What a wonderful example of high-tech medicine, if you will, to serve the purpose of soft touch healing. And I think that is so germane to this conference, to this audience, to this community. Our third speaker right here is Dr. Lou Awad. Lou is a physical therapist by training. He's a rehabilitation scientist and the founder of the Boston University Neuromotor Recovery Laboratory. He's an associate professor in the Department of Physical Therapy at BU School of Medicine, the Sargent College of Health and Rehabilitation Sciences. He has a secondary appointment in the Department of Mechanical Engineering in the BU College of Engineering. He's a standing member of the Musculoskeletal Rehabilitation Sciences Study Section of the NIH and recognized as a key opinion leader in stroke rehabilitation. Lou approached Cimit maybe 3-4 years ago with an idea that we found compelling, and we funded Lou in his translational journey early on, and he has since gone on to do wonderful things. He's here to talk to us today about his experience along that long and winding road.
So again, good morning, everyone. My name is Lou Watt. I'm an associate professor of physical therapy at Boston University, where I also direct the Neuromotor Recovery Laboratory. And just to begin, I wanted to share a video of like our lab here so you get a sense of where we do the work. And the lab is focused on experimental biomechanics and the use of experimental biomechanics in combination with our expertise in physical therapy, engineering, and software development to develop and study wearable, rehabilitative, and assistive technologies. And so I bring this perspective of a clinician, a biomechanist, and a rehab scientist to the work that we do. And research in the NRL spans this continuum for translation, from iterative and progressive studies that are focused on device development to the systematic generation of the clinical evidence that's needed to alter clinical practice. And I'm very proud that this translational work is being done by an amazing team that bridges traditional disciplines. Our team members come from medicine, from physical therapy, and from engineering, with professional homes both in academia, in hospital settings, and in industry. And I think that it's this team science approach that has really enabled our work to have real-world impact beyond just publishing papers in big journals. And really by contributing to the success of multiple medical device startups, including 2 of these with products that are already on the market. And not just any tech products, but these 2 companies in particular have high impact medical devices that have been designated by the FDA as being breakthrough technologies due to their ability to meet unmet healthcare needs. And for the rest of my talk, I'm going to focus on one partnership in particular, our work with the company MedRhythms, that and share how our work together for the last about 8 years or so, developing and studying and clinically translating their breakthrough medical device called the Intandem. So Intandem is a closed loop, autonomous neurorehabilitation system that harnesses the rhythm of music to retrain walking after a stroke. And before I get into the details of what Intandem is, let's talk about the unmet need, right? I'm going to use this video to do that. What you're watching here is a snapshot in time of a person who is struggling to walk. What you don't see is her journey to this point and her likely future. So several years before this video was taken, this person had a stroke that damaged the parts of her brain that control movement. And after her stroke, she underwent rehabilitation at some of the best hospitals in the world located right here in Boston. And she received best-in-class care at each level of care. But here she is several years later. She needs an assistive device. Her gait is slow and asymmetric, and by all counts is unstable. She's at high risk of falling, and she knows it. balance confidence and self-efficacy is extremely low in people who have had a stroke. And together, deficits in mobility and confidence result in people post-stroke walking very little in the everyday world. And over the long term, this reduced physical activity leads to poor health outcomes and a reduced quality of life. And this person's story is not unique. Slow walking speed is a near universal deficit after a stroke that rehab clinicians tend to focus a lot on. And it's for good reason. How fast a person walks is associated with their health, their function, their quality of life, fall risk, even mortality. Faster people tend to be healthier and they live longer. But we know that walking speed is just one dimension of walking. Gait quality parameters like stability and efficiency also matter. If with every step a patient takes, they're risking a catastrophic fall, or every bout of walking is labor intensive and effortful, they're not going to walk much, even if they can walk fast. So gait quality is also important. And one way we can assess gait quality in the motion capture lab that I run at BU is by examining the three-dimensional ground reaction forces that are produced as our feet rhythmically interact with the ground as we walk. Every step we take requires coordination of propulsion, braking, loading, offloading forces. And this within-step coordination rhythmically repeats across steps. Any kind of disruption to this rhythm can have dramatic consequences on the quality and speed of walking. And so to illustrate this, I'm going to shift gears for a moment, and I don't think the sound's going to play, so I'm going to try to make this work. I'm going to shift gears a moment and talk about the rhythm of walking from the lens of the rhythm of music. What I'm going to do is I'm going to play a couple different sounds for you, and without shouting it out, I want to see if you can recognize what song, they're from one song, what song these sounds are from. So let me play the first one. I don't think you heard it. No. Sounds of silence. Try one more thing before I try to sing it for you. Okay, it's not working. What if I did this? Anyone know what sound that's from? What song that's from? Let me do it again. Any clue? Oh, you got it. That is amazing. So what you would hear if I went through all of this are two sounds from the song We Will Rock You by Queen. And half the people who are like true believers, true fans would immediately catch it. The other half, right? The other half would be like, what are you doing? What is this? Right? And so what I would ultimately be doing is a stop, stop, clap. Stop, stop, clap. You know, we will rock you. Now, and what I was gonna show you, and I can't play it for you, unfortunately, is that same basic rhythm, that stomp, stomp, clap, is also found in other songs by Katy Perry and my favorite, Eminem, right? Till I Collapse, and I don't know anything about Katy Perry. So the point, though, that I was trying to make is that what finally made that those sounds recognizable was locking them in that 3-sound sequence that Queen made iconic in We Will Rock You. And if we change the temporal structure of one of those stomps or claps, like if we deleted one of the stomps or claps or increased the duration between a stomp or a clap, it would still have a rhythm, but it wouldn't be that same iconic rhythm. And the point I'm trying to make is it's the same thing with walking. So what I'm showing you here is a single gait cycle that's broken down into 3 primary parts. For anyone that walks on 2 legs, this every step requires this repeating rhythmic sequence of body weight support, propulsion, and limb advancement. And the challenge is that for most of our patients, they have trouble with each one of these subtasks, as well as the rhythmic transition across the subtasks. And the result is that our patients can walk, they have a rhythm, but they don't walk very well. Their rhythm isn't what it's supposed to be. In contrast, healthy walking is quite remarkable. Though different people, even in this room, may naturally walk at different speeds and different rhythms, each of us walk at a speed and at a rhythm that is optimal. What does optimal mean? Well, when we think about optimality in biomechanics, typically we think about energy minimization. And the idea here is that wise nature seeks economy of effort. And evolutionary biologists believe it's so important to walk at that optimal speed and optimal rhythm that they believe our bipedal gait pattern actually evolved to select for economy. For every meter that we walk, humans use less than half of the energy that our quadruped cousins, gorillas, and chimpanzees use when they walk on two legs. The point is, our economical gait pattern is not because we walk on two legs, that's a common misconception, but how we rhythmically transition from one leg to the other. But this evolutionary advantage is lost in many of our patients with known disruption to that rhythmic control of walking, who require 3 to 4 times the energy to walk that an age-matched healthy individual would require. And this is where the in tandem comes in. So in the human brain, direct connections between auditory and motor neural circuitry cause us to start moving when we hear a predictable rhythmic beat. And this effect is called auditory motor entrainment. And it doesn't matter if that rhythmic beat is in a metronome, you'd be hearing a metronome right now, or if it's wrapped up in music, you'd hear that metronome wrapped up in music right now. The entrainment effect is the same, and it's harnessed by the in tandem device. At its simplest, in tandem promises to help patients improve their walking simply by having them walk to time-shifted versions of their favorite music. And if you peek under the hood of the technology, though, what you'll find is that this closed-loop intervention uses inertial sensors embedded into the device to track over 70 gait parameters in real time. And that real-time gait data is then fed into an algorithm that sets the musical tempo based on a real-time assessment of the patient's movement abilities. And then the tempo is then progressively increased or decreased to match the needs of the patient. And this results in this individualized and progressive music-based gait intervention. We've been working with MedRhythms for about 8 years now, since 2016, to study the in tandem intervention. Early on, we ran extensive biomechanical experiments to support their development. And then when we realized we had something special that could really help patients, we worked to design and launch a multi-site randomized control trial to evaluate safety and efficacy of the intervention. And before I dive in and share some of those clinical findings, I wanted to take a step back and share one of the most important lessons I learned on this journey. And it's that clinical evidence is important, but it's not enough. So as medical device developers, our goal is to help patients. And so there's a real need to have an evidence generation plan that can evaluate the efficacy of our interventions and test safety and usability in end users. But that's just the first piece of the puzzle. What I've learned, and I mean, I'm not a seasoned entrepreneur, but what I've learned is that commercial success requires multiple strategic partnerships. And for an FDA-regulated prescription device like the in tandem, an obvious partner are prescribers and influencers of those prescribers, like the PTs. And for this group, scientific publications help, but they're really not enough. To get buy-in from these experts and key opinion leaders, you need to have years of intentional relationship building. And if you wait until you have a product in hand, what I've discovered is if you wait until you have that to start engaging with them, you're really late to the game. And now another obvious partner is the FDA. And for MedRhythms, early conversations with FDA were very critical to inform the R&D strategy. But FDA is not where the buck stops here. For a neuro rehab company like MedRhythms, overcoming the regulatory battle is just step one here. Reimbursement is probably the most important part of the commercial equation. And MedRhythms was out there talking with payers and policymakers and learning from them from the very beginning. If I take a step back and I describe the timeline around in tandem's commercial launch, all of these lessons come full circle. So marketing authorization for in tandem was secured in the summer of 2023, leading to a limited commercial launch in the fall of 2023. Early adoption by strategic providers and payers that MedRhythms had been engaging with for years at that point helped demonstrate the fundamentals of their commercial model, prescribing and real-world utilization. And then more importantly, this group helped them establish critical reimbursement fundamentals using data collected during this early adoption phase In August of 2024, MedRhythm secured a benefit category and a novel HCPCS code from CMS, and currently is working with select payers, including CMS, to establish pricing and coverage. And now it's with these commercial reimbursement milestones in place that MedRhythms is preparing to scale. Right, so you can see all the different stakeholders that kind of come together to support where they are right now. But with all that said, let's not forget clinical evidence is important. It may not be enough, but it is important. And what I want to use in these last few minutes is to rapid fire some of our findings of this music-based technology, all of which has been published in multiple publications shown here. So if you want to dig deeper, I do invite you to. So our very first 2 feasibility studies recruited 10 people in the chronic phase of stroke, and we asked them to complete 1 week of fully autonomously delivered intervention from the device. They were being supervised for safety by a clinician, but they weren't getting any kind of care from that clinician, just for this first prototype tests. And not only did we find that these subjects experienced clinically meaningful improvements in their walking speed, with repeated sessions leading to session over session gains in speed, but gait quality was also improving with a remarkable 42% reduction in energetic impairment compared to what a healthy age-matched level would be. And building on that initial evidence, we refined the technology and discussed the pivotal study design with FDA and multiple payers, and then settled on and ran an 88-subject, 8-center, multi-site RCT to evaluate the safety and efficacy of the intervention relative to a control group. And to be brief, the study met its primary clinical endpoint. The in tandem resulted in patients being 3 times as likely to be clinical responders. The study documented improvements at multiple levels, from speed to biomechanics to safety to self-perceived recovery, and all of that documented in the paper. I do encourage you to check it out. But an interesting spin on this is that clinical evidence really wasn't enough when we started talking with FDA. And that's because the device was meant to be used independently by patients in the home setting. And so they required additional evidence of usability by intended users in the intended settings in use. And this led to a separate usability validation study where we ended up finding that 93% of our post-stroke users were able to complete all critical usability tasks, from receiving the kit, unboxing the kit, donning the sensors, and starting a session and going for the training intervention. And what I'm gonna do now is not end showing you a video, but I'm just gonna show you the person who the video was. And if anyone can lip read, what you're gonna see is one of our collaborators on this work, who some folks may recognize here, who has really been a strong supportive individual for the work that we are doing. This is Keith Urban, just naming the name. And it's been really inspiring working with folks in the music industry to see the power of music in medicine and health, especially for these intractable chronic gait deficits that we see in neurological populations like stroke. All right, he said a bunch of cool things about us. That's what he said. Thank you, everyone.
Okay. As our speakers are coming to the front, Lou, your talk reminded me that I used to teach piano music to children, and one of the ways to teach children rhythm is to utilize their rhythmic walking. So it's kind of flips the music to help gait into a bidirectional relationship. So this is a opportunity for folks to ask questions of our speakers. There's 2 microphones in the here, and our first question will come from Andrew.
Thank you for the great series of talks. This question is actually for Michael and Stephen. There seems to be, actually I have 2 questions. One is there seems to be a trend towards openness and transparency in sort of the digital health, machine learning, AI. There's a lot of the code, for instance, being loaded up into GitHub. And that certainly is the trend in academia. But, I think we're also seeing this in large language models like Meta doing the Llama platform. So how would you sort of balance this openness, but also the possibility of commercialization? How can you see sort of being profitable or commercializing in this age of transparency?
So let me divide that into two separate questions. The first being open source and the use of open source. The second being large language models or other non-predictive outputs. So if you are offering a regulated device, so a device that the FDA has some purview over, using open source is very problematic. So you will have to pull your code, lock your code, submit that system package, your code, your hardware, anything, any modifications, and basically keep that under change control as part of your ISO 13485 quality system. So at that point, you're no longer open source, right? You are controlling, you may have started with something open source, but you've verified and validated it per your 13485 quality system, submitted it to the FDA, they've blessed it. And now you say, I can repeatedly ship this and give the same quality, the same efficacy, time and time again. So from a professional perspective, from a company offering FDA regulated device, you may start with open, but you're not going to be open after that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
The second question regarding large language models specifically, or non-predictive outputs more generally, is a huge unknown now, and something that FDA is really struggling with, right? I mean, we've all seen the benefits of it. I think in my class at MIT, every program is using LLM for something, right? And frankly, from my perspective, FDA hasn't caught up. They don't know how to think about this. So I'm hoping that over the next 12 to 18 months, we're going to get some clearer direction on particularly how that can be used in the context of safe and effective medical devices.
Great. Thank you.
Hello? Hello. Yes, great. So I can answer that in the context of research. So we have an LLM, but it's a LBM, large brain model. And when we work with research partners, they're generating brain data. And so we work at the institutional level and at the level of consent to ensure that the data that's being gathered by the third-party researcher has proper consent to de-identified enter into our large brain model. And then we work with the researcher to give them insights and feedback based on the access to that model. So we don't think about this, we think about this as an open science project. We're not too worried about the commercialization aspects of it, because at the moment there's nothing specifically to commercialize. It's in an effort to build knowledge and understanding of the brain. So we've seen it work quite effectively in this current environment.
Great. Can I?
Andrew, perhaps before you, are you all set?
I have a second question, but
Oh, okay, please go ahead.
And this question actually is to Ariel and Lou. And, there seems to be, in terms of the devices, there are two paths in front of you. One is a consumer sort of target audience or whatever. And then the second one is the clinical path, where you go through the FDA and in the hospitals and healthcare systems are your target audience, I would say. So, there seems to be that two paths. And what are the considerations that you take into sort of your planning to figure out which path you would take? And where you're at right now? Just curious.
Great. So we began, as I told you, in the consumer path because there's very low barrier to access, and then naturally evolved into the clinical path. We can be in clinical use through the FDA general wellness. However, one of the main limitations is that people still need to pay out of pocket or out of their FSA, HSA dollars. So there is a next obvious step for us to go through the FDA path so that we can then get the requisite codes for payer clearance. And that's probably the biggest hurdle for us. And we are all set up to do FDA. You know, our manufacturer can do FDA. We have our processes internally, but the cost hurdle is massive. You know, the FDA clearance in and of itself is not expensive, but having the QMS systems up and running that are maintained annually for us would add about $250,000 per year on top of $1 million investment. So at a certain point, it becomes an investment question. Is it worth the outcomes to invest at this point that money? And for us, we've been able to exist nicely in these two spaces, and the FDA continues to, you know, look favorably upon what we're doing. So we haven't been forced to do that path, but obviously, you know, the reward of being part of a payer system could be there, but we're also seeing payers shift. So, you know, there may still be opportunity for us to be reimbursed even outside the FDA system.
Great.
That was a fantastic answer. So I don't have much to add except, and I'm not a member of the team at MedRhythm, so I can't speak for them. But from my perspective, what they did very early on was commit to be a prescription medical device that would be prescribed by a physician for a patient to meet a necessary healthcare need. And to do that, they needed to go down the path of being you know, the FDA being regulated and then eventually get reimbursed for it. And so they committed to that path very early on. There was obviously consideration, well, why not just load it up to the App Store and have people download it for $5, right? But that just wasn't the path that they had to take in order to be credible as a prescription medical device. And so they committed early on to that path, but who's to say which is the best path? Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I can add an experience for a small company, the decision point to market directly to consumer versus going through the FDA process, which as Ariel said, is very expensive, meaning you have to have substantial resources monetarily and in terms of expertise to accomplish that. In my clinical specialty of epilepsy, there was a time when companies, often motivated by a child of the founder of the company, created a wearable device to detect a seizure. And those took many forms, from movement accelerometers to video systems for the bedroom and so forth. And they were field tested on a very limited number of people, typically the child of the inventor, and then advertised, you know, directly to the consumer. One such company started across the river at the MIT Media Lab in Patica. We were not looking at sleep quality. We were, not to trivialize that, but that's not a life or death situation. We were looking at devices that could potentially alert a care provider, parent, for example, to a life-threatening event. And for a doctor, they were not prepared to recommend these devices for that use to their patients or the patients' families, because they had not been proven to the satisfaction of the FDA to be accurate, to be robust at all. And so while it was financially feasible for these companies to enter the marketplace as a consumer product, the uptake in clinical use was very low. And so we've since seen those kinds of technologies garner the investment necessary to get FDA approval, which Empatica, for example, did do. Please, your question?
Hi, I'm Lisa Lehman, a physician at MGB and also at Verily. And just thank you so much for your excellent talks. I'm curious, my question is for Stephen and Mike. First question, related to GATE and what you mentioned, Mike, in terms of the evolving landscape and guidance for FDA in terms of AI and generative AI in particular. I'm curious what the guidance is that Cimit and Mike, that you give in your entrepreneurship work with regard to the regulatory approach for AI and ML in digital, digital health devices or patient-centered decision care support tools, and how you're approaching that. And then related to that, how you're embedding ethics and equity into the guidance and that, as you work with people in this space.
I have no idea.
Okay.
I mean, seriously,
We'll
like
work on it.
most of my students have AI involved in their product in some way, and I really don't have any wisdom to give them. I mean, other than the fundamentals, right? You've got to be safe and effective. And as Steve said, while many people assume that going direct to consumer is less expensive, I think the people who have done that, and maybe Ariel, you can comment, in retrospect, that may not be true. So here's a data point. Generally speaking, for a direct-to-consumer sort of wellness or medical type device, you should expect to spend about 1/3 of your total lifetime value of that consumer on customer acquisition. So if you expect that the customer is going to pay you $10 a month and you're going to have that customer for a year, say, so $120 lifetime value, you would probably expect to spend about $40 to acquire that customer. You're offering a product, probably, even if it's software, you have running costs associated with that. So many people don't think about the customer acquisition cost in their overall economic model. They're just thinking it's, I'm making something that's software, it's cheap. I'm going to sell it for $10 a month. I'm going to make $9 a month profit. In fact, you're probably making more like $3 or $4 a month profit. So the trade-off to set up the quality management system that Ariel mentioned earlier is more of an upfront expense, but it does help overcome some of the clinical barriers that Steve has mentioned, right? So whether you are offering direct to consumer or to like through a clinical pathway is an important strategic decision. The way this is related to your notion is if you can make the argument that while there is some generative AI behind it, ultimately there's a clinician backstopping the decision. So it's your professional discretion. That is the current thinking that many of these companies are doing, right? So they're tending to, if they go direct to consumer, it's more of a toy. If they're going through a clinician as you as the prescriber and you ultimately being responsible for the advice or care that is given, that's the way they're handling it until FDA figures out how to deal with it.
I mean, that's an interesting perspective. It's not entirely clear to me that the onus is that the clinician can be that backstop. And it seems that from the regulatory perspective, ONC, the Office of National Coordinator, or what's now called ASTP, with their HTI-1 Act, has squarely sort of said that there's a requirement for both developers of AI in healthcare as well. And then you have HHS and the Office for Civil Rights saying that there is a requirement for the people that are using the AI, the healthcare industry. So I think it's really a complicated landscape. And I think part of the question here is like, how do we figure out how to do the right thing, right? How to make sure, even the regulation is evolving, how do we make sure that our devices that we're developing are safe and effective? Yeah.
No advice.
It's currently a paradox. While open source and software apps and applications that are meant for everybody can lead to the democratization of healthcare and patient-centric empowerment. The journey to get to that point, can defeat that, those opportunities and wind up making the tool available only to people that have a smartphone or that have, access to technology and so forth. So I think that's what we're struggling with in our other NIH funded program, the Blueprint Neurotech program. These are guiding principles of our work. It's just, not clear how to get to that desired endpoint with the current system we have in place as our capitalistic society has evolved.
One quick question for Ariel. I'm wondering if you could elaborate on the brain insights that are being developed with the tool that you developed. You mentioned that it also has some brain insights that are coming through AI.
Sure. So it's a 4-channel EEG. We can add additional channels on the head. To reference one of the papers that I put up, so we were able to look at our database, just looking at age and gender and EEG. We have a database of people who've used Muse for, some of them for 4 years, every single day, so we can really see changes in the brain. And we're able to look at, we looked at the first marker, age. What does the brain look like at a particular age? And we were able to identify in wake that alpha peak frequency is actually quite a reliable marker for brain age. And in sleep, we found a novel marker in sleep spindles, and that the characteristics of your sleep spindles are actually the most reliable marker for your age, whether you're looking at wake EEG or sleep EEG. So that's just one example.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. We have time for 2 more questions. Please.
Hey, I'll get low. So question probably at Ariel first, but across the board, when you make the choice to take your technology, the commercialization route, because let's say FDA is very difficult, or you're doing it and you know it's going to be 5-7 years, how do you help to make sure that your technology is accessible to the populations that would really benefit? Because I think this is one struggle I'm seeing is, all right, we can get it, but it's just not another longevity 1% sort of product that comes out. So I'd just be curious of how you're thinking about that.
Great question. And so, part of the answer to how do we make it accessible, in part is go consumer before FDA, because FDA takes so long. You need to be able to fund your company throughout that. And you ultimately end up with a product that's priced at, $2,000 because now it's a clinical device that can only be accessed through a prescription, as opposed to $200 because it's not a clinical device and you can benefit from the economy of scale. So, we developed 500,000 Muses, which brings the cost of the development of it way, 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 way down per device, which allows us to offer it to the public at much cheaper than had we only be selling a smaller number into the rarefied air of clinical. So that's, one of the answers to making it more accessible. With consumer, you have to really make it accessible, because when we think about accessible, we think about, all right, what populations can afford it, what populations can access it, but also like, how do you technically use this thing? So we had to go through many more cycles to make it really like dead simple for anyone to use. We'd always say, can anyone's grandma use this? And it turns out they can, but it took a lot of UI and UX work to make that possible. And so, there are multiple ways to make your technology accessible. Now we have researchers using it with like kids in rural Georgia to track sleep. Places that you couldn't have gotten technology into, but we were able to, because we have an economy of scale, give the researcher a big discount to then have 200 devices that they could deploy there. So, those are some of the ways.
I may comment. Accessibility from an economic perspective is one thing, but accessibility to people with different user needs is different. And as Ariel said, you need to design that in from the beginning. And in fact, we have a very painful experience that we're going through right now in a program that we run. And I'm beginning to think you need to design that in even before you design the program. So how many people here have done an LFA COVID tests? Probably everybody, right? You've used the little dropper, you've, swabbed your nose, you've put it in the buffer, you've put it in. Imagine doing that if you're blind. Simply doesn't work. So while we spent literally billions of dollars to get COVID tests out, we found that they didn't work very well with people who had low vision or no vision, or people who had motor skill challenges. So we set up a accessible test program specifically targeting that. and gave a bunch of money to a bunch of big companies to develop tests that were more accessible. They spoke to you, they had different outputs. And that was the emphasis on the UX part of it. Not a single one of them has made it through FDA because not enough attention was paid to the sensitivity and specificity of the test. So more and more high sensitivity, high specificity tests are coming out that aren't paying attention to accessibility. So it's not like you can go to a blind person and say, well, here's a test that doesn't work as well as a sighted person's test. Yet there are no accessible tests out there. So that taught us, or taught me, I think, that before the program even starts, you have to take a standards perspective on what's expected for, at-home EEG monitoring or COVID testing or whatever your product is.
Nature, if you're trying to build for everyone, then you'll build for no one because you'll never get there. So you have to start with someone who probably is quite capable, and then slowly you add and add and add so you can, engender more edge cases. We're constantly finding new ways that people are using this. So we have several MCI studies and a few Parkinson studies. And my first question to the researchers were they actually able to put it on themselves? Like, did this actually work? Did their arthritis allow them to press the button? Because these weren't tests that we could do. But now that people were starting to explore those edges, now we can go and try to accommodate for them.
Yeah, and I think that brings me to another thing is, as all these incredible devices and tools come out, how do we navigate and educate a consumer? I think we see this in psychedelics as well, and all these things that, okay, it can be medical, but there's recreational. So how do you even guide somebody that this is a choice for you?
So I can maybe give a little bit of perspective from the MedRhythm side. So in parallel with the experimental studies we were doing in the research lab, MedRhythms also had this innovative product lab that was launched right in the middle of COVID-19. So they weren't able to bring people into their offices in Portland to do some of these usability tests. They had to actually ship the kits to the patients in their homes, and they ended up engaging over 100 patients from over 22 different states, from different walks of life, just because they had to, because they couldn't recruit from the Boston, Portland area. And what they found during that time was the hardest thing for patients to start was opening the kit, like opening the box. These are patients with usually just one hand. They may not have a caregiver available. And so they iterated on different boxes. Then the next problem was hooking it up to the charger. And so then they iterated on multiple different chargers. And then it was putting the sensors on the wrong feet. So then they iterated on different sensors. And this all happened in a decentralized way where they were just shipping kits over and over again to these amazing patients who dedicated and provide their time to help build out this technology. So while we were building up the clinical evidence, there's also usability work that was behind the scenes, building up the technology that ultimately got launched. And I guess I'll stop there.
And please, your question.
Hi, I have a little simpler question. I'm a huge fan of physical therapist and Keith Urban, and I lived with a mother who had Parkinson's disease for 25 years. So I have two questions for Lou. One, does the patient get to choose their song or their playlists? And two, does it work across domains in terms of other movement disorders?
Yeah, great question. So part of that usability research, what we learned was that patients don't want to have to pick each song. They want to pick like the 70s, the 80s, or a particular genre. And so there was a decision point early on, like, do we give them the opportunity to select their playlist and move it into what they get to play with, or just pick a genre, or pick a whatever? And they wanted that simplified choice. So the capability of the system can use any song that has a certain beat salience. And even if it doesn't have that beat salience, there are algorithms to overlay a certain beat salience to it. So we could probably make most songs work if there's any rhythm there. And then the second question about other neurological disorders. So we're actually part of a long-term collaboration with MedRhythms, studying the technology in Parkinson's disease. We have a number of papers have already been published in Parkinson's. I can say this because the CEO announced this at the last conference I gave with him. They're looking to launch a product in Parkinson's in early 2025. And really, stroke is an interesting population because when you talk to physicians who work with patients with Parkinson's and patients with Parkinson's, rhythmic auditory stimulation is one of the most powerful interventions for Parkinson's. And so the fact that it works in stroke so well and it works so well in Parkinson's, it just speaks to the power of music and rhythm to influence neuromotor control.
I have one favorite memory from my mom at a big family event when my very strong nephew got her up out of the wheelchair and danced with her. And once he got her up and they were holding each other, that rhythm and the song was a delight for all of us to see. So thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I'd like to thank Peter and the organizing committee for inviting us. And on behalf of the audience, I'd like to thank our speakers.
And I'd like to thank Steve and the whole group. When we were envisioning this event, it started with Steve and this very pragmatic translational component. And I think it exceeded my expectations. I think setting the groundwork and having Steve and Mike's experience with Cimit to look at this roadmap and then to see it illustrated so beautifully with the work of Ariel and Lou, it's just fantastic. So we're lucky to have this. So thank you all. Thank you all for listening.